Good day, I'm Dr. T and welcome to my office. So in a previous video I talked about polymers and mentioned that chemistry quite often takes a bit of a backseat to the physical properties of the polymers. And to that we have to understand how that these guys are arranged at a molecular level. So if I think about my polymer as a series of spaghetti noodles, which a lot of them are unbranched polymers, and that is a legitimate way of thinking about them. If they're just simply all over the place like a pot of pasta, then this is what we call an amorphous polymer or amorphous solid. And in this case, I'm assuming this is a solid because most polymers under normal conditions are solids, although not always. With this guy, these typically are a little bit more flexible. If you see your water bottle, that's going to be an amorphous polymer. Now, a couple of things can happen though. One, these amorphous spaghetti noodles can start to line up. So imagine a block of ramen noodles that you didn't separate. Now in this case we call this semi-crystalline. You can actually see a couple of different versions of this terminology. Some folks will call semi-crystalline when you have a mix of organized and disorganized regions within your polymer. So you've got, a bunch of polymer, some of them kind of spaghetti noodles, some of them are kind of lined up like ramen noodles. And we would say then you have crystalline bits, nice and lined up, and you would have amorphous parts. Overall, it's semi-crystalline. Others would say that, hey, if they're all lined up, that's crystalline, but the counter-argument is, yeah, you never really see that. It's almost always a blend between amorphous and crystalline parts. The more crystalline you get, typically the more rigid and brittle you become, so you're able to take more of an oomph without flexing, but you don't flex, you break. And so you can see this with a lot of your harder plastics. Also, depending on exactly what's going on, this can also lead to the crystalline regions reflecting or refracting light, thereby causing your plastic to be opaque instead of transparent, as you can see with, say, a milk jug. Okay, so what else can I do with this one? Well, those amorphous solids have an important feature called the glass transition temperature. This is a temperature in which the amorphous polymers, when it's above this temperature, they're able to slide past each other, and we call them a plastic. They're able to do plastic deformation. They slide past, they rearrange themselves. However, below the glass transition temperature, they behave as a glass. They don't slide past each other. They become brittle and break. You can actually see this in cold climates with certain plastics. You have to be careful of them. They become stiff and can crack if forces are exerted to them. However, once they warm up, if they didn't crack, you can now flex and bend them all you would like. So, what if I don't like the properties of my polymer? Can I change it? Well, yes, I can. For starters, let's look at that glass transition temperature. If that glass transition temperature needs to go down a bit for you, you can add plasticizers. These are molecules that sit in the polymer. They're not covalently bound to the polymer. They'll kind of wedge themselves into it. And by doing so, they'll make it harder for the polymer to line up and go into that glass state, thereby lowering the glass transition temperature, making your polymer much more flexible. These, however, like a lot of additives, as time progresses, they can leach out of the plastic, so this can have a couple of consequences. If the plasticizer itself is not biologically desirable, it's maybe a bit toxic or carcinogenic or otherwise causes problems, then you can have issues with that leaching out into anything that might be consumed by an individual or organism. Additionally, as they leach out, well, they're no longer functioning as a plasticizer, and this is one of the reasons why plastics will become brittle over time. They lose their plasticizers. Now, I can have other additives to my plastics, things like colorants to give them a nice color, or fire retardants so they don't burn. Alternatively, I can do what's known as crosslinking. So in crosslinking, I'm going to take multiple of my spaghetti noodles of polymer, and I can actually hook them covalently together. This is going to toughen up your polymer considerably. If you think about, say, some soft rubber, this doesn't have much cross-linking going on, and it's kind of this gummy mess. However, if you look at your tires, what makes your tires and that soft rubber not? Well, that's cross-linking. By taking a molecule, linking that to two different chains or two different spots on a polymer's chain, you're able to lock it in place. And since they can't slide past each other, they're going to behave in a tougher manner, capable of taking more physical stress, but, you know, potentially having the inability to slide past each other, so they're going to become more rigid as well. This leads me to my last thought on plastics. If you haven't used cross-linking, and they're not insanely large polymers, typically these plastics are going to be what we call thermoplastic. They can melt. So if I have, say, some Legos, the way I make Legos, well, actually I should say the way Lego makes Legos, because if I made blocks, I couldn't call them Legos due to trademarks. But the way Lego makes Legos is you take a thermoplastic plastic in the form of pellets. They heat up the pellets, they squirt them in the mold, and once it cools off, boom, you have a Lego. Now, if I have a polymer that has lots of cross-linking in it, then if I heat it up, it's not going to liberate up the polymer strands, allow them to slide past each other and turn into a liquid for me to then squirt into a mold. In this case, we call this thermoset. Typically, these are molded into whatever shape you want, and the heat in the molding process causes a chemical reaction that then locks them together, such as cross-linking. These don't melt, they burn. Yeah, so they're thermal set. They're set in place and don't melt. So with that said, that's a brief overlook of polymers. A couple things to get your eyes out for, but definitely a surface level. There's a whole lot more to polymers to jump into. So with that said, have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in later videos.